The wagon wheels groaned against the frozen ruts as Mara Bentley pulled her threadbare shawl tighter. Wyoming territory stretched before her like a vast white grave, the December wind cutting through her wool dress as if it were made of paper. She'd traveled 2 days from Laramie to reach the Raines ranch, her few possessions rattling in the carpet bag at her feet. The advertisement had been brief. Woman needed cooking and housekeeping, child to tend, no questions. It was the last part that had caught her attention. In a territory where most men sought wives or companions, a man who wanted no questions was a man who understood loss. The ranch house emerged from the snow like a dark wound against the white landscape. Built of rough-hewn logs and stone, it squatted beneath the weight of winter, smoke rising from its chimney in a thin, reluctant stream. No welcoming light glowed from the windows. No dogs ran out to greet the wagon. The driver, a grizzled man who'd barely spoken during their journey, spat tobacco juice into the snow. "This be it, ma'am? The Raines place." He glanced at her, something like pity in his weathered face. "You sure about this Calder Raines ain't exactly known for his hospitality?" "I'm sure," Mara said, though her voice came out smaller than she intended. She'd buried her boy 3 months ago, and the emptiness inside her made even this desolate place seem like a possibility for something anything different from the suffocating grief of her sister's house in Laramie. The front door opened before she could knock. The man who filled the doorframe was everything the territory had warned her about. Calder Raines stood over 6 feet, his shoulders broad enough to block out what little light came from inside. His face might have been handsome once, but grief had carved deep lines around his mouth and eyes. Dark hair, unkempt and too long, framed features that seemed permanently set in stone. He wore the rough clothes of a rancher, but something in his bearing spoke of a different past military. Perhaps the way he held himself, alert but weary, like a soldier who'd never quite left the battlefield. "You the woman from Laramie?" His voice was rough from disuse. "Mara Bentley, Mr. Raines." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her plain dress, her work-worn hands, the absence of frivolity. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him. "Pays $15 a month. Room and board. You cook, clean, tend to my daughter. No interference, no advice, no mothering. She's got a mother. She's just dead." The brutality of his words might have shocked another woman, but Mara only nodded. "I understand." "Do you?" His gray eyes narrowed. "My daughter doesn't speak. Hasn't for 8 months. Not since her mother died. You won't fix her. Don't try." "I'm here to cook and clean. Mr. Raines. Nothing more." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or relief. He stepped aside. "Your room's off the kitchen. You'll meet Iris tomorrow. She's sleeping." The inside of the house was as unwelcoming as its master. Good furniture sat covered in dust. Paintings hung crooked on the walls, and the air held the stale quality of a place where windows were never opened. A woman had made this house a home once Mara could see it in the delicate curtains, now gray with neglect, the fine china visible through the glass doors of a hutch, the braided rug whose colors had dimmed beneath layers of dirt. The kitchen, at least, showed signs of use. Dishes sat unwashed in a basin, and the remnants of a burnt dinner crusted the bottom of a pot. Through a doorway, she glimpsed her room small, sparse but clean enough. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single chair. It would do. "I'll need supplies," she said, surveying the near-empty pantry. "Flour, salt pork, beans, coffee. Make a list. I'll send Paolo to town tomorrow." He turned to leave, then paused. "Breakfast at dawn. Iris won't come down. Leave a tray outside her door. Don't knock. Don't call to her. Just leave it." "Yes, Mr. Raines." He studied her again, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Why?" he asked finally. "A woman like you could find work in town. Safer work, easier work. Why come out here?" Mara met his gaze steadily. "You advertised no questions." Mr. Rains. I took that to mean both ways. For the first time, something that might have been respect crossed his features. He nodded once and disappeared into the darkness of the house, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Mara stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the wind howl around the corners of the house. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaked the child, perhaps moving in her room. She thought of her own boy, the weight of him in her arms growing lighter each day of his fever until there was nothing left to hold. She'd sung to him, those last nights, hymns their mother had taught her, lullabies from her own childhood. She wondered if anyone sang to the silent child upstairs. Rolling up her sleeves, Mara set to work. First the dishes, then the stove. By the time the moon rose full and cold over the mountains, she had restored some order to the kitchen. Tomorrow she would tackle the rest, room by room if necessary. It was what she knew how to do: create order from chaos, make something from nothing. It was what women like her had always done in this hard country. As she prepared for bed, she heard it, a sound so soft she might have imagined it. A child crying, muffled as if into a pillow. She stood frozen, one hand on her bedroom door. The sound came again, drifting down through the floorboards like snow through cracks. Every instinct urged her to go upstairs, to offer comfort, but Calder Rains had been clear. No mothering, no interference. She forced herself into her room and closed the door, but sleep wouldn't come. The child's crying had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was worse, a silence that seemed to press against the walls of the house like a living thing. In that darkness, Mara allowed herself one moment of weakness. She pulled from her carpet bag the only photograph she'd kept, a daguerreotype of a boy with dark eyes and a serious mouth. Thomas, her Tommy, gone these 3 months, buried in Laramie beside his father. She traced his face with one finger, then carefully wrapped the picture in cloth and placed it in the drawer of the washstand. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tomorrow she would face the silent child and her stone-faced father. Tomorrow she would begin the work of maintaining this house of grief. But tonight, in this cold room, in this desolate place, Mara Bentley closed her eyes and let herself remember what it felt like to be needed. The wind continued its assault on the house, and somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled long and mournful, calling to a pack that might or might not answer. It was a sound that belonged to this place, this intersection of civilization and wilderness, where people came to forget or to hide or to simply survive another winter. Mara pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and began to pray, not for herself, not even for the man and child in this house, but for the strength to do what needed doing without wanting more than she'd been hired to give. In this territory, wanting too much could kill you as surely as the cold. But as sleep finally took her, she found herself thinking not of her own loss, but of the child somewhere above her, motherless, voiceless, alone in her grief, and despite every warning, despite her own broken heart, Mara felt the dangerous stirring of something she'd thought buried with her son. Hope. Dawn came like a reluctant visitor to the Rains ranch, gray light seeping through the frost-covered windows. Mara had already been awake an hour, stoking the kitchen stove and mixing biscuit dough by lamplight. The house seemed to resist warmth, its walls holding onto the cold like a grievance. She prepared a simple breakfast: biscuits with honey, porridge sweetened with molasses, and a glass of milk she'd found in the cold storage. The tray was her best effort at welcome: a clean napkin, the least chipped plate she could find, even a small sprig of dried lavender discovered in a forgotten drawer. Setting it carefully outside the child's door, she retreated down the stairs without knocking. Calder was already at the kitchen table, a cup of black coffee before him. He looked as if he'd slept in his clothes, or perhaps hadn't slept at all. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly, the premature silver threading through his dark hair, the way his hands trembled slightly until he wrapped them around the coffee cup. "Iris won't eat the lavender," he said without preamble. "It's not for eating." Mara set his breakfast before him, heartier fare than his daughter's, with bacon and fried potatoes. Sometimes small beautiful things help, even if we don't think they will. He grunted, neither agreement nor dismissal, and ate in silence. Mara busied herself with cleaning, aware of his presence like a storm cloud in the corner of her vision. When he finished, he pushed back from the table. "I'll be working the north pasture. Storm damaged the fence line." He paused at the door. "She'll come down when I'm gone. Stay in here. Don't look at her directly. Don't speak unless she speaks first." "Like taming a wild creature," Mara murmured. Exactly like that. His voice held no warmth. "My wife used to say Iris was half fairy, more comfortable with animals than people. Now—" He didn't finish, just pulled on his heavy coat and disappeared into the white morning. Mara continued her work, kneading bread for the noon meal, scrubbing the neglected corners of the kitchen. She heard it when it happened, the soft creak of stairs, the whisper of small feet on wooden floors. Fighting every maternal instinct, she kept her back turned, humming softly as she worked. The child was a ghost at the edge of her vision, small for 7 or 8 years, with her father's dark hair hanging in uncombed tangles past her shoulders. She wore a nightgown too thin for the season, her feet bare despite the cold floors. Like a shadow, she slipped to the pantry, took an apple, and turned to flee. But something made her pause. Perhaps it was the humming an old lullaby Mara's mother had sung, one that seemed to rise from her throat without conscious thought. Or perhaps it was the smell of baking bread, the warmth of the kitchen after the cold emptiness of upstairs. Whatever the reason, Iris didn't immediately retreat. Mara continued working, rolling out pie dough for the evening meal. After a long moment, she heard the scrape of a chair. From the corner of her eye, she saw the child had perched on the very edge of a seat, ready to bolt at any moment. The apple remained untouched in her small hands. They stayed that way for nearly an hour, Mara working, Iris watching. When the bread was ready to come out of the oven, Mara spoke to the room at large, as if talking to herself. "Always tricky, knowing when bread's done proper. My mama taught me to listen for it. Says it sounds different when it's ready, like it's whispering secrets." She pulled the golden loaves from the oven, the kitchen filling with their warm scent. Course, she also said bread made with sadness would taste of tears. Never believed her till I was grown. She cut a thick slice from the warm loaf, spread it with butter and honey, and set it on the table not directly in front of Iris, but within reach. Then she turned back to her pies, humming again. The silence stretched between them, but it was a different quality of silence than the house had held before. This had possibility in it, like the pause before snow begins to fall. Finally, Mara heard the soft sound of eating, the quiet scrape of the plate being pushed away. When she turned at last, Iris was gone, but the plate was empty save for crumbs. Progress, then, small as a mustard seed, but progress nonetheless. The days fell into a pattern. Breakfast left outside the door. Calder's silent presence at dawn. His departure. Then Iris's ghostly appearance. Each day the child stayed a little longer, ventured a little closer. Mara learned to move slowly, to keep her voice soft and directed elsewhere, to leave small offerings within reach, a cookie here, a cup of warm milk there. She learned other things too, that Iris would listen to stories if Mara told them to the empty air, that the child's fingers would trace patterns in spilled flour when she thought Mara wasn't looking, that sometimes, late at night, the crying would start again, and Mara would hear Calder's heavy footsteps pacing the hall above. On the 5th night, the crying was worse. It went on, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the house. Mara lay rigid in her bed, fists clenched against the urge to go upstairs. But then she heard Calder's door open, his footsteps in the hall, and still the crying continued. Without conscious decision, Mara found herself moving. She lit a candle and climbed the stairs, her bare feet silent on the cold wood. At the landing, she saw him, Calder, standing outside his daughter's door, one hand pressed against the wood. his face a map of helplessness. "She won't let me in," he said without turning. "Hasn't since the funeral. I can hear her in there, crying herself sick, and she won't let me in." Mara said nothing, but began to hum, the same lullaby she'd been humming in the kitchen, but softer now, meant for the darkness and the grieving child behind the door. Slowly, so slowly, the crying began to quiet. Then Mara did something she hadn't done since the night her Thomas died. She sang, not just humming, but words soft and low, about a mockingbird and a looking-glass, about a billy goat and a cart and bull, about all the small promises parents make to children when the world is too much to bear. The crying stopped entirely. Behind the door, they could hear movement, the child getting out of bed, padding closer to listen. Calder's face in the candlelight was raw with something that might have been pain or might have been hope. When the song ended, Mara stepped back. "She'll sleep now," she whispered. "How did you know that song?" His voice was rough. "Every mother knows it. You have children. Had," the word hung between them like a blade. "Had a son." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw recognition in his eyes, one grieving parent to another. "I'm sorry." "So am I." She turned to go back downstairs, but his voice stopped her. "Thank you." She nodded without turning back. Some things were too fragile to acknowledge directly, like the first green shoots of spring or a wounded child learning to trust again, or a father and a hired woman standing in a dark hallway, bound momentarily by shared loss and a lullaby that had, for just a moment, held back the dark. In her room, Mara sat on the edge of her bed and let herself cry quietly, carefully, for the son she'd lost and the daughter upstairs who was lost in a different way, for the man in the hallway and the woman who'd left them both, for all the ways the world could break a heart and still demand it keep beating. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges. Tomorrow Iris might retreat again, might refuse even to come downstairs. Tomorrow Calder might rebuild his walls, might pretend this moment of vulnerability never happened. But tonight, a child had stopped crying. Tonight, a father had said thank you. Tonight, in this house of silence and sorrow, a small door had opened. It wasn't much, in the vast indifference of the Wyoming winter. It was hardly anything at all. But as Mara finally lay down to sleep, she thought of her grandmother's words, "Even the smallest candle throws a shadow larger than itself." Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps, in a house this dark, even the smallest light could matter. The thaw came slowly to the Rains Ranch, reluctant as everything else in that house to change. Ice dripped from the eaves in a steady rhythm while inside. Another kind of melting had begun. It was a Tuesday when Mara decided to make molasses cookies. The kitchen smelled of ginger and cinnamon, and she worked with deliberate slowness, knowing Iris watched from her usual perch by the door. 3 weeks had passed since that night of crying and lullabies, and though the child still hadn't spoken, she no longer fled at the slightest movement. "My mama always said the secret was in the stirring," Mara said to the mixing bowl. 12 times to the right, 12 times to the left. Course. She also said you had to think happy thoughts while you did it, else the cookies would taste of whatever was troubling you. She measured flour with exaggerated care, spilling a little on the table. From the corner of her eye, she saw Iris lean forward slightly. "Now I need another pair of hands." Mara continued conversationally. "These old fingers don't work as well as they used to. Shame to waste all this good dough just because I can't manage the rolling proper." The silence stretched, filled with possibility. Then, so quietly Mara almost missed it, came the soft pad of bare feet across the floor. Iris approached the table like a deer approaching water, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Mara didn't look at her, just stepped aside and gestured to the dough. "Flour first, so it doesn't stick." Small hands reached for the flour bin. They worked in silence, Iris rolling the dough while Mara cut shapes with an old tin cutter, hearts and stars and circles, simple shapes that required no words. When the first batch went into the oven, Iris didn't retreat to her corner. She stayed, one finger tracing patterns in the spilled flour. M, she drew, then A, then M again. Mara's heart squeezed, but she kept her voice steady. That spells ma'am. Is that what you called your mama? A tiny nod. The finger moved again. M-A-M-A. That's a good word, Mara said softly. One of the best words there is. Iris looked up then, and Mara saw her clearly for the first time. She had her father's dark hair and strong features, but her eyes were gray-green like sage after rain. Beautiful eyes, old beyond their years. The moment might have broken there, fragile as spun glass, but the oven timer chimed. They pulled out the cookies together, golden and perfect, and Mara set them to cool on the windowsill. She poured 2 glasses of milk and sat at the table, leaving the chair beside her empty but available. This time, Iris took it. They ate cookies in companionable silence, and Mara felt something ease in her chest, a knot she hadn't known was there. When Calder's heavy tread sounded on the porch, Iris tensed but didn't run. She looked at Mara with something like panic in those sage-green eyes. It's all right, Mara whispered. You're allowed to be here. This is your home. Calder stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene his daughter at the table, cookie crumbs on her chin, sitting closer to another human being than she had in 8 months. His face went through several expressions too quickly to read before settling on careful blankness. Smells good in here, he said finally. Molasses cookies, Mara replied, rising to fix his coffee. Iris helped make them. She saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. Did she now? Iris slipped from her chair and approached her father slowly. She held out a cookie, slightly lopsided, one of the first she'd cut. Calder took it with hands that shook slightly, bit into it with the reverence of a man taking communion. It's perfect, he said, his voice thick. Thank you, little bird. And then, miracle of miracles, Iris smiled, just a tiny quirk of her lips, there and gone like sunlight through clouds, but unmistakably, a smile. Calder made a sound that might have been a sob if he'd been a man who allowed himself such things, and sank into a chair. Paolo brought the supplies from town, he said after a moment, voice determinedly steady. Including that fabric you asked for, said Mrs. Morrison at the general store sent along a pattern for a child's dress. Iris's clothes are getting too small, Mara said carefully. Growing children need new things. Her mother made all her dresses. The words came out flat, automatic. She was clever with a needle. I'm sure she was. Mara set his coffee before him. I'm not trying to replace anything, Mr. Rains, just trying to keep a growing girl warm. Iris had crept closer to her father's chair, and now stood just within reach, hesitantly, as if she might spook. Calder reached out and touched her tangled hair. Would you like a new dress, little bird? Another tiny nod. Then, unexpectedly, Iris pointed at Mara and mouthed a single word, pretty. You want Miss Mara to make it pretty? Calder's voice was barely a whisper. This time the nod was firmer. Iris reached out and took one of Mara's hands, then one of her father's, and tried to bring them together. The gesture was clumsy, desperate, the movement of a child who had forgotten how to use words but not how to want things. All right, Calder said, his hand closing briefly over Mara's before pulling away as if burned. Miss Mara will make you a pretty dress. The rest of the evening passed in a kind of careful peace. Iris helped set the table for supper, moving between Mara and her father like a small ambassador of hope. She didn't speak, but she was present in a way she hadn't been since Mara's arrival. When exhaustion finally overtook her, she let Calder carry her upstairs another first. Mara was washing dishes when he returned, standing in the doorway like he didn't quite know how to enter his own kitchen. She let me tuck her in, he said wonderingly. Hasn't let me do that since she even let me brush her hair. She's healing, Mara said simply. Children do, given time and patience. Is that what happened with your boy? The question came out harsh, but she heard the real need beneath it. No. She dried a plate with careful attention. Thomas didn't have time. Fever took him in 4 days. But before that, yes, children heal from all manner of hurts if we let them. And if we don't get in their way. That too. He moved into the kitchen properly then, picking up a dish towel to help. They worked in silence, but it was the comfortable silence of shared purpose. I stood in her doorway every night, he said suddenly, after Catherine died. Stood there wanting to comfort her but not knowing how. She'd cry and cry, and when I tried to go to her, she'd scream worse, like my touch burned. So I stopped trying. Pain makes us strange, Mara offered. Makes us push away the very things we need. Is that what you did after your boy? She considered the question. Came here, so yes, I suppose I did. But you sing to her. You got her to smile, to make cookies. How? I'm not you, she said gently. I'm not the one she lost. Sometimes it's easier to accept comfort from a stranger than from someone whose own pain reminds us of what's gone. He absorbed this in silence, hanging the wet towel with precise movements. She wrote something in the flour. Before I came in, I saw her. Yes. What was it? Mara hesitated, then told the truth. Mama. His hand stilled. Oh. She was remembering Mr. Rains, not replacing. The difference matters less than you might think. His voice was very quiet. When she smiled at me tonight for a moment, I forgot Catherine was gone. Forgot everything except that my daughter was smiling. And then I remembered, and the guilt nearly knocked me down. Guilt for forgetting. Guilt for being happy, even for a second. He turned to face her then, and she saw the raw truth in his eyes. What kind of man feels joy when his wife is barely a year in the ground? The kind who's still alive, Mara said, the kind who has a daughter who needs him to be. Something shifted in his face, then a recognition, perhaps, or a permission he hadn't known he was seeking. Thank you, he said simply. For tonight, for the cookies, for giving her a reason to smile. She would have found it eventually. Children always do. Maybe. But she found it with you. He moved toward the door, then paused. That song you sang. The other night, Catherine used to sing it too. Most mothers do. Yes. He looked back at her. Something new in his expression. Not quite warmth, but the possibility of it. Most mothers do. After he left, Mara stood alone in the kitchen, hands pressed against the solid wood of the table. Somewhere above, a little girl slept peacefully for perhaps the first time in months. Down the hall, a grieving father sat with his own tangled thoughts. And here in the warm kitchen that smelled of molasses and ginger, a woman who'd thought her mothering days were done felt the dangerous bloom of purpose in her chest. It was too much, too fast. She knew the risks of caring again, knew how much it could cost. But when she finally made her way to her small room, Mara found herself humming the same lullaby that had quieted Iris's tears, that Catherine had once sung, that mothers everywhere knew by heart. Tomorrow she would cut fabric for a new dress. Tomorrow she would teach Iris to braid her hair. Tomorrow she would watch Calder remember how to be a father without drowning in guilt. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and small victories. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at the Rains Ranch, Mara felt something that wasn't quite happiness but was kissing cousin to it. Tonight, a child had smiled and eaten cookies at the kitchen table. Tonight, a father had tucked his daughter into bed. Tonight, in this house of sorrows, something new had taken root, fragile as spring grass pushing through snow, but stubborn too, like all growing things that survived in this hard country. It would need tending and time and no small amount of faith. But it was a beginning, and in a place where endings had held sway for so long, a beginning was no small thing. The china bowl had belonged to Catherine Raines, delicate blue roses painted on white porcelain, brought from Philadelphia as a wedding gift. It sat on the high shelf in the parlor like a relic in a shrine, untouched since her death. Which is why, when it shattered on the floor that March afternoon, the sound seemed to echo through the house like a gunshot. Iris stood frozen among the fragments, her face white as the broken porcelain. She'd been reaching for a book on the shelf, standing on tiptoes, when her elbow caught the bowl. Now she stared at the destruction with the look of someone watching the world end. Mara heard Calder's boots on the porch, returning early from checking the calving heifers. She moved toward Iris, but the child backed away, shaking her head violently, tears streaming down her face. The door slammed open. "What was that?" Calder stopped mid-sentence. Taking in the scene, his face went through several transformations, confusion, recognition, and then something terrible. "The Roses Bowl," he said, voice deadly quiet. "Catherine's Roses Bowl." Iris made a sound not quite a word, more like a wounded animal's cry. She looked between her father and the broken pieces, then bolted for the stairs. "Don't you run from this!" Calder's voice cracked like a whip. "Iris Catherine Raines, you come back here." But she was gone, her door slamming with a finality that shook the walls. Calder stood among the ruins of the bowl, hands clenched, breathing hard. The afternoon light caught the broken edges, making them gleam like tiny knives. "It was an accident," Mara said quietly. He whirled on her. Don't you dare defend her. That bowl, Catherine chose it herself, packed it in tissue paper and sawdust, carried it 2,000 miles. His voice broke. She ate her Christmas pudding from it the night before she died. "Mr. Raines." "Every day." He was pacing now, crushing porcelain under his boots. "Every day I've kept her things exactly as they were. Every dress, every book, every blessed teacup. And for what? So a careless child can destroy them piece by piece." "She's not careless. She's 7 years old." "She's old enough to know better." The words exploded from him. "Old enough to understand some things can't be replaced. Like her mother." The silence that followed was deafening. Calder went very still, color draining from his face. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. "You forget yourself, Miss Bentley." "Perhaps I do." Mara straightened her spine. "Or perhaps I remember what it's like to be a child drowning in adult grief. That little girl didn't break that bowl out of carelessness or spite. She was reaching for a book, probably one her mother used to read to her. You don't know that. Don't I look at which shelf she was reaching for?" Mara pointed to the disturbed books. McGuffey's Reader, Mother Goose, A Child's Garden of Verses. She wasn't being destructive. Mr. Raines. She was trying to remember. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, late-season flurries that meant winter wasn't done with them yet. In the distance, a calf bawled for its mother. "She hasn't touched anything of Catherine's since the funeral," Calder said, voice hollow. "Not her clothes, not her books, nothing. Why now?" "Because she's healing. Because she made cookies and smiled and remembered what it felt like to be happy. And happy children reach for things." Mara began carefully gathering the larger pieces of porcelain. "The question is, what matters more, the bowl or the reaching?" He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Catherine would have said the reaching." "Then honor that." "With what?" He gestured at the fragments. "It's destroyed, like everything else in this house, like everything I touch." "That's your grief talking, not the truth." "Isn't it?" He was pacing again, avoiding the broken china. "I couldn't save Catherine, couldn't comfort Iris after, can't even keep a blessed bowl safe on a shelf. What kind of father, what kind of man? The kind who's doing his best in impossible circumstances." "My best," he laughed bitterly. "My best has my daughter running from me in terror." From upstairs came the sound of furniture moving, the scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Calder's face went white. No, he breathed. Then louder. No. He took the stairs 3 at a time. Mara close behind. Iris's door was barricaded. Through the wood, they could hear her sobbing great gulping sobs that seemed too large for her small body. Calder threw his shoulder against the door, but whatever she'd used to block it held firm. Iris, open this door! He pounded with his fist. Please, little bird, please! The sobbing intensified. Through the door came a sound that made them both freeze, the crash of something else breaking. She's destroying her room, Calder said, horror in his voice. Just like after Catherine, oh God, not again, not again. He threw himself against the door with renewed desperation, and this time Mara heard wood splinter. Another crash from inside. And now Iris was screaming wordless, anguished sounds that seemed to tear from her throat. Stop, Mara said, grabbing Calder's arm as he prepared to ram the door again. You're frightening her more. She's hurting herself in there. Then be what she needs, not what your fear demands. Mara moved him aside gently but firmly. She pressed her palms against the door and began to sing. It wasn't the lullaby this time. It was an older song, one her grandmother had sung during storms, about safe harbors and steady anchors, about ships that weathered gales and found their way home. Her voice was steady, pitched to carry through wood and fury. The crashing stopped. The screaming faded to hiccups. And then, miracle of miracles, they heard the scrape of furniture being moved away from the door. It opened a crack, revealing one green-gray eye, swollen with tears. Mara knelt slowly, making herself smaller. There you are, she said softly. What a storm that was. The door opened wider. Iris's room was in chaos, books thrown from shelves, bedding on the floor, and in the center of it all, the shattered remains of a hand mirror that had probably been her mother's. Oh, little bird, Calder breathed behind Mara. What have you done? But Mara saw what he didn't. Among the destruction, Iris had built something, a nest of her mother's dresses pulled from the wardrobe. Arranged in a circle on the floor, the child sat in the center of it, clutching a photograph to her chest. May I come in? Mara asked. A tiny nod. Mara entered slowly, picking her way through the debris. Behind her, she heard Calder's sharp intake of breath as he followed. Is that your mama? Mara asked, indicating the photograph. Another nod. Iris held it out with shaking hands. The image showed a laughing woman with light hair and kind eyes, holding a much younger Iris on her lap. Both were smiling at something beyond the camera. She's beautiful, Mara said. You have her smile. No. The word came out cracked and small, the first word Iris had spoken in 8 months. No smile. Gone. Your smile isn't gone, Mara said gently. I saw it just yesterday, over cookies. Mama's smile. Iris touched the photograph. Mama's bowl. Gone. I made it gone. Oh, sweetheart. Mara opened her arms, and Iris fell into them, sobbing anew. Breaking something doesn't make the love go away. Mad, Iris whispered into Mara's shoulder. Papa mad. Mara looked up at Calder, who had sunk to his knees among his wife's dresses. His face was ravaged, tears flowing freely. Not at you, he said, voice thick. Never at you, little bird, at myself, at the world, but never, ever at you. Iris peeked out from Mara's embrace. Promise. Promise. He held out his arms, and after a long hesitation, Iris crept from Mara to her father. He crushed her against him, burying his face in her dark hair. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For the yelling, for the anger, for all of it. They stayed that way, father and daughter clinging to each other among the wreckage. Mara began quietly gathering Catherine's dresses, folding them carefully. As she worked, she heard Calder speaking softly to Iris. Mama wouldn't want us to keep her things like museum pieces. She'd want us to use them, remember with them. Maybe we could make something new from that bowl. press the pieces into a garden stone. Perhaps something that could live outside, catch the sun. With roses. Iris's voice was tiny but clear. All the roses you want. As the afternoon sun slanted through the window, Mara helped them bring order to the chaos. They gathered the broken mirror carefully, spoke about turning it into a mosaic, found homes for the scattered books, smoothed the rumpled bedding, and when they discovered more of Catherine's things, a silver brush, a leather journal, a music box that played a German lullaby, they handled them with reverence but not fear. She wrote about you, Calder said suddenly, holding the journal. After you were born, said you were her greatest adventure. Read? Iris asked. And he did, there on the floor of her room, surrounded by the remnants of grief and rage and love. He read Catherine's words about first smiles and sleepless nights, about dreams for her daughter's future and the fierce love that had taken her by surprise. When the light began to fade, they made their way downstairs together. The parlor floor still glittered with porcelain fragments, but somehow they seemed less like destruction now and more like scattered stars. We'll clean it up, Calder said. Make something new, like we said. Together, Iris added, slipping her hand into his. That night, dinner was a quiet affair, but not silent. Iris spoke in small bursts, single words mostly, as if testing her voice after its long sleep. She helped Mara with the dishes while Calder carefully collected every piece of the roses bowl, storing them in a box with the reverence of someone gathering sacred relics. When bedtime came, Iris let both adults tuck her in. As Mara smoothed her blankets, the child caught her hand. Stay, she whispered. Both stay. So they did. Calder in the chair by her bed, Mara on the floor beside him, while Iris's eyes grew heavy. Just before sleep took her, she spoke once more. Mama's bowl broke, but we didn't. No, little bird, Calder whispered. We didn't. Later, when Iris slept peaceful and deep, they crept from her room, in the hallway. Calder caught Mara's arm gently. You knew, he said. You knew she needed to break things before she could heal. Sometimes we have to shatter before we can rebuild. Is that what you did after your boy? Mara considered. I ran instead. Came here. Maybe that was my way of breaking, leaving everything behind. And the rebuilding. She looked toward Iris's door, then at him. Perhaps that's what I'm doing now? Something shifted in his expression, a recognition, a softening. We're a pair of broken souls, aren't we, all three of us? Broken, yes, but not beyond repair. He studied her in the dim hallway light, and for a moment, the careful distance between employer and employee seemed to waver. Then he stepped back, rebuilding the walls but leaving them a little lower than before. Thank you, he said simply, for knowing what she needed, for knowing what we both needed. Sometimes it's easier to see from the outside. Perhaps, or perhaps you see clearly because you've walked this road before. He moved toward his room, then paused. That song you sang, about harbors and anchors, Catherine would have liked it, after he was gone. Mara stood alone in the hallway, listening to the old house settle around her. Tomorrow would bring the work of making something beautiful from broken pieces, both the bowl and the hearts learning to beat again. Tomorrow, Iris would speak more words, and Calder would remember more of how to be the father he'd been before grief swallowed him whole. But tonight had its own victories. Tonight, a child had broken her silence, and her father had broken his anger. And from the shattered pieces of both, something new was already growing. Something that looked less like the past preserved in porcelain and more like a future built from forgiveness and patient love. In her small room, Mara pulled out Thomas's photograph one more time. We're healing, my boy, she whispered to his solemn face. All of us, in our own broken ways. And for the first time since his death, the thought brought more comfort than pain. The storm came without warning on a late March evening, sweeping down from the mountains like an angry god. Mara had seen plenty of Wyoming blizzards, but this one had teeth wind that screamed around the corners of the house and snow that fell sideways, thick as a wall. Calder had gone out hours earlier to check on the cattle in the far pasture. "Just a quick ride," he'd said, pulling on his heavy coat. "Want to make sure the pregnant heifers are sheltered." That was at 3 o'clock. Now, as the mantel clock chimed 8 and the storm raged with increasing fury, Mara stood at the kitchen window, straining to see through the white chaos. Beside her, Iris pressed her small face to the glass. "Papa late," the child said, her newly recovered voice tight with worry. "The storm probably caught him at the line shack," Mara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "He's likely waiting it out there." But even as she spoke, she remembered Paolo's words from that morning. Roof on that old shack finally gave way. Boss said he'd fix it come spring. No shelter. Then, and in a storm like this, a man could get turned around between the barn and the house, let alone miles out on the range. "I'll put supper in the warming oven," Mara said, moving with deliberate calm. "For when he gets back." Iris didn't move from the window. "Mama went out in snow," she whispered. "Didn't come back." Mara's hand stilled on the pot handle. She'd learned pieces of Catherine's death over the weeks, how she'd gone to help a neighbor with a difficult birth, how the storm had come up sudden, how they'd found her 2 days later when the snow cleared, frozen peaceful. They said, like she'd just laid down to sleep. "Your papa knows these lands," Mara said carefully. "He'll find shelter." "Promise." The word hung in the air, demanding truth. Mara knelt beside the child, taking her cold hands. "I can't promise that, but I can promise we'll watch for him, and we'll keep the lights burning so he can find his way home." They lit every lamp in the house, setting them in windows like beacons. The storm rattled the glass, and sometimes Mara thought she heard voices in the wind, her Thomas calling for her, Catherine singing lullabies, all the ghosts that winter brought close. By 10 o'clock, Iris had fallen asleep in the parlor chair, exhausted by worry. Mara covered her with a quilt and resumed her vigil at the window. The storm showed no sign of breaking. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger, and with it, her fear. She thought of Calder out there, his steady hands, his rare smiles, the way he'd begun to soften these past weeks, how he'd worked beside her to make the garden stone from Catherine's bowl, pressing each piece of porcelain into concrete with careful reverence, how he'd started staying in the kitchen after supper, talking about his plans for spring planting while she mended clothes, how his eyes had begun to hold something warmer than grief when he looked at her. No, she pushed the thought away. She was here to cook and clean and help with Iris. Nothing more. The fact that her heart had begun to race when he entered a room, that she found herself listening for his footsteps, that she sometimes caught him watching her with an expression she didn't dare name. None of that mattered if he was lost in the storm. By midnight, she'd made her decision. The heavy coat Catherine had left too fine for a hired woman but perfect for this purpose hung by the door. Mara pulled it on, along with 2 wool scarves and every pair of mittens she could find. Where go? She turned to find Iris standing in the doorway, quilt trailing behind her like a cape. "To find your papa." In the snow, the child's eyes were huge. "Like Mama." "No." Mara knelt before her. "Not like that. I'm going to tie a rope from the porch to the barn, then from the barn as far as I can go. I won't let go of the rope, no matter what. That way I can always find my way back. I help. You have the most important job. Keep all the lamps lit, sing songs so your voice carries on the wind. Be our lighthouse, bringing us home." Iris nodded solemnly. "What songs?" "Any songs, all the songs. Let him hear that we're waiting." The first step outside nearly drove Mara back. The wind hit like a physical blow, the snow so thick she couldn't see her own feet. But she thought of Calder out there, maybe hurt, certainly cold, and pushed forward. The rope, good hemp from the barn, played out behind her as she fought her way across the yard. The barn loomed out of the white suddenly, nearly causing her to collide with its wall. Inside, the horses whickered nervously, but Calder's stallion was gone. Confirmation. Then, that he hadn't made it back. She tied off the first rope and started a second, heading in the direction of the north pasture. The wind tried to tear her from her path, and more than once she went to her knees, but always she kept one hand on the rope. Behind her, faint but unmistakable, came Iris's voice singing the lullaby Mara had taught her, high and sweet and brave. 20 feet, 50, 100. The rope played out, and still nothing but white and wind and cold that seemed to reach into her very bones. She was about to turn back when she heard it, or thought she did, a sound that wasn't wind. Calder! Her voice was swallowed immediately. Calder! There again, to her left, but if she left the rope. She tied the end around her waist, giving herself another 10 feet of range, and struggled toward the sound. Her feet hit something solid, a dark shape in the snow. Her heart stopped, then resumed at double speed. It was Mars, Calder's stallion, standing head down against the wind, and there, slumped in the saddle, was Calder himself. No, no, no! She reached up, shaking him. Calder, can you hear me? A groan. His eyes opened, unfocused. Mara, his voice was slurred with cold. I can't find home. I've got you. She grabbed Mars's reins, fighting to turn the horse. Follow the rope. We follow the rope home. But Calder was sliding from the saddle, his frozen hands unable to grip the horn. Mara caught him as he fell, both of them ending up in the snow. He was so cold, too cold, and heavier than she'd expected. Get up, she commanded. Calder reins. You get up right now. Iris is waiting. She's singing for you. Iris, singing? Wonder crept into his voice. My bird is singing. Yes, so you have to get up. You have to come home. Somehow, between her pulling and his stumbling efforts, they got him standing. She half dragged, half carried him, one hand on the rope, the other around his waist. Mars followed, a patient shadow in the storm. The journey back seemed endless. Several times Calder's knees buckled, and only her grip kept him moving. He mumbled things about Catherine, about roses, about how Mara's hair looked like honey in lamplight. She told herself it was the cold talking, stored each word anyway. Then, blessed sight, the barn loomed before them. She got Calder inside, out of the worst of the wind, but knew they couldn't stay. He needed warmth, needed it now. Mars would have to fend for himself. The last stretch from barn to house nearly defeated them both, but Iris's voice grew stronger. And then there was golden light spilling from the windows, and the porch was under their feet. They fell through the door in a tangle of snow and frozen cloth. Iris flew to them, crying, Papa, Papa, while Mara struggled to close the door against the wind. Get blankets, she ordered Iris. All the blankets, and stoke the fire. She stripped Calder's frozen coat, his boots caked with ice. His hands were white with frostbite, his lips blue, but he was conscious, was breathing, was alive. So cold, he muttered. Couldn't remember which way. Then heard singing, heard my bird singing and tried to follow but got turned around. Shh. She wrapped him in blankets, positioned him before the fire. You're safe now. Iris returned with more blankets and the kettle. Together they worked to warm him hot tea forced between chattering teeth, warm cloths on his frozen hands and feet, layer after layer of wool. You came for me, he said suddenly, eyes focusing on Mara's face. Into the storm. You came. Of course I did. Catherine always said I was too stubborn to die. His laugh turned into a cough. But tonight I thought maybe she was wrong. Well, she wasn't. Mara rubbed his hands between hers, willing warmth back into them. Though you certainly tested the theory. Papa scared me, Iris said softly. curled against his side. Like when Mama didn't come home. I'm sorry, little bird. He freed one arm from the blankets to pull her close. I'm so sorry. Should have turned back sooner. Should have. He looked at Mara then. Something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. Should have remembered I had reasons to come home. The weight of that look made Mara's breath catch. She busied herself heating more tea, aware of every movement, every glance, every breath in the room. They stayed that way through the night, Calder wrapped in blankets before the fire, Iris asleep against his shoulder, Mara keeping watch. The storm gradually exhausted itself, wind dying to whispers, snow falling gentle as forgiveness. As dawn touched the windows, Calder spoke. I saw her, Catherine, in the snow. Mara's hand stilled on her mending. What did she say? Nothing, just smiled and pointed back the way I'd come, like she was saying I'd gone far enough. He paused. Then I heard Iris singing, and you calling my name, and Catherine. She nodded and faded away, like she was satisfied. Perhaps she was. I've been so afraid, he continued quietly, careful not to wake Iris. Afraid of forgetting her, afraid of betraying her memory if I let myself feel anything for anyone else. Calder. But tonight, when I thought I might not make it back, it wasn't Catherine's face I saw. It wasn't her voice I followed home. He looked at her directly then, all pretense stripped away by nearness of death. It was yours, Mara, you and Iris, my reasons to live. The words hung between them, precious and terrifying. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, setting the snow-covered world ablaze with light. I'm just the hired woman, Mara whispered. No. His voice was firm despite his exhaustion. You stopped being that the night you sang my daughter out of her silence. You stopped being that when you made us a family again. Before she could respond, Iris stirred, yawning. Papa home? She asked sleepily. Yes, little bird. Papa's home. And Miss Mara? She looked between them with those two wise eyes. Miss Mara home too. Calder met Mara's gaze over his daughter's head. A question in his eyes that had nothing to do with employment and everything to do with the heart's geography. Yes, Mara said softly, answering more than the child's question. I'm home too. The morning light grew stronger, painting the room in shades of gold and possibility. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world clean and new. Inside, three souls who had weathered their own storms sat close together, warming themselves at more than just the fire. Spring would come soon, bringing its changes, but for now, in this moment suspended between night and day, between storm and calm, between past and future, they were simply what they'd fought through darkness to become. A family. April arrived with muddy boots and melting snow, and with it came Reed Rains from Denver. Mara first saw him from the kitchen window, a well-dressed man dismounting from a hired carriage, his boots too clean for ranch country, his coat too fine for Wyoming weather. Uncle Reed, Iris, burst from the house before anyone could stop her, launching herself at the visitor with an enthusiasm that made Mara's chest tight. The child had bloomed these past weeks, chattering like a magpie, helping with chores, sleeping through the night without tears. Reed caught her, swinging her in a circle. There's my favorite niece, how you've grown. And talking again. I hear. Lots of talking, Iris confirmed. Miss Mara says I make up for lost time. Papa says his ears might fall off from all my questions, but he's smiling when he says it. Miss Mara. Reed's eyes found the window where Mara watched. That would be the new housekeeper. Something in his tone made her step back from the glass. She busied herself with lunch preparations, trying not to listen to the voices carrying from the yard, trying not to notice how Calder's laugh sounded forced. They came in together, Reed's arm around his brother's shoulders in a gesture that looked fraternal but felt possessive. Up close, the family resemblance was clear, same dark hair, same strong features. But where life had weathered Calder into something solid and true, Reed had the polished look of a man who'd never known real hardship. "You must be the miracle worker," Reed said, taking Mara's hand without invitation. His palm was soft, unmarked by labor. "I've heard remarkable things. My brother's letters have been quite enthusiastic." "I'm just the housekeeper, Mr. Rains." She extracted her hand carefully. "Would you like coffee?" "What I'd like," Reed settled into a chair as if he owned it, "is to understand how you've accomplished what doctors and relatives couldn't. Iris hasn't spoken since Catherine died, and suddenly she's chattering away. Children heal in their own time." Calder interjected. Mara simply gave her the space to do so. Space. Reed's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Is that what we're calling it?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Iris, sensitive to adult currents, pressed closer to Mara's side. "Why don't you show your uncle the garden stone you made?" Mara suggested. "The one with your mama's roses." The child brightened and tugged Reed outside, leaving the two adults in charged silence. "He means well," Calder said finally. "I'm sure he does." Mara returned to her bread dough, kneading perhaps more vigorously than necessary. "Family usually does." "He's been after me to move to Denver. Says it would be better for Iris, proper schools, society, other children." "And what do you say?" "I say this is our home." His voice was firm. "Catherine loved this land. Iris belongs here. And you, where do you belong?" He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the leather and pine scent of him. "I'm beginning to remember." The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass, until Reed's voice shattered it. "Calder, you need to see what your daughter's done. Quite artistic, really." Lunch was an ordeal of careful conversation. Reed regaled them with stories of Denver society, of business opportunities, of eligible young ladies who would make suitable wives and mothers. Each word seemed calculated, each glance at Mara measuring. "Of course," he said, cutting into his beef with precision. "You'll want to consider Iris's future. A girl needs proper feminine guidance, someone of appropriate standing." "She has feminine guidance," Calder said quietly. "A housekeeper is hardly—" "Mara is more than—" Calder caught himself, jaw tightening. "Iris is thriving under Mara's care. For now." Reed dabbed his mouth with his napkin. "But surely you're not planning to keep a hired woman indefinitely. People will talk. Calder, a widower, a young woman under his roof." "Let them talk." But color had risen in Calder's cheeks. "Papa doesn't care about people talking." Iris piped up. "He says gossip is for folks with nothing better to do, like Mrs. Henderson in town, who said, 'That's enough, little bird.'" Calder's voice was gentle but firm. Reed's eyes sharpened. "And what did Mrs. Henderson say?" Iris looked confused. "Just that Papa better marry Miss Mara quick before someone else snatches her up. But that's silly. Why would someone snatch Miss Mara? She's not a hat or a horse." The silence that followed was deafening. Mara felt her face burn and busied herself clearing plates. Reed leaned back, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. "From the mouths of babes," he murmured. "Tell me, Miss Bentley, what are your long-term plans? Surely a woman of your capabilities has ambitions beyond domestic service." "My plans are my own business, Mr. Rains." "Of course. Forgive my curiosity. It's just that my brother's welfare and my niece's are of paramount importance to me." He produced an envelope from his coat. "Which is why I've taken the liberty of making some inquiries in Denver. The Pemberton family is seeking a governess. Excellent wages, refined household. I could arrange an introduction." "That's kind of you, but—" "The Weatherby household is also interested. Judge Weatherby's wife specifically asked after you when she heard of Iris's improvement. They have 3 daughters who would benefit from your touch. Read. Calder's voice held warning. Enough. I'm simply presenting options. Reed's innocence was theatrical. After all, we can't expect Miss Bentley to remain in service forever. A woman her age should be thinking of marriage, children of her own. I had a child. The words came out sharper than Mara intended. A son. He died. So yes, Mr. Rains. I've thought of children of my own. I've held my own child while he burned with fever. I've sung him to sleep knowing he wouldn't wake. I've stood over a grave too small for the love it had to hold. Is that sufficient thinking for you? Reed had the grace to look ashamed. I apologize. I didn't know. How could you? You don't know me at all. She untied her apron with steady hands. If you'll excuse me, I need to check the washing. She escaped to the yard, breathing hard. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, the air sweet with the promise of spring. She'd overreacted, she knew. Let him needle her into revealing too much. But the way he'd looked at her, like she was a problem to be solved, a threat to be removed. Miss Mara. Iris appeared at her elbow, face creased with worry. Are you sad? No, sweetheart. Just needed some air. Uncle Reed makes the air inside heavy sometimes. The child's perception was startling. Papa says it's because he lives in the city, where they forget what clean air tastes like. Despite everything, Mara smiled. Your papa might be right. Are you going away to those families Uncle Reed talked about? No. She knelt to Iris's level. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. That word again. That dangerous, binding word. I promise I won't leave without talking to you first. How's that? Iris considered this. Okay, but I'd rather you promise to stay forever. Forever is a very long time. Papa says that's what family is. Forever. Even when someone goes to heaven like Mama. She tilted her head. Are you family? Miss Mara. Before she could answer, Calder emerged from the house. Reed nowhere in sight. His face was thunderous. Iris, go help Uncle Reed pack his things. He's leaving earlier than planned. The child scampered off, leaving them alone in the spring sunshine. I'm sorry, he said without preamble. Reed had no right. He's protecting his family, I understand. Do you? He moved closer, intensity radiating from him. Because what I understand is that he came here to undermine us, to make you doubt your place here, to make me doubt. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. He thinks I'm betraying Catherine by feeling again. Are you? I thought so. For months, I thought so. But then you came, and Iris smiled, and the house felt alive again. And I realized Catherine wouldn't want us entombed with her. She loved life too much for that. Calder. I know what people say, what they think. The widower and his housekeeper. It's a story as old as time. Isn't it predictable? Convenient. Everything Reed implies with his careful words. His hands clenched at his sides. But what I feel, what's growing between us, there's nothing convenient about it. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't want you to go to Denver, not to the Pembertons or the Weatherbys or any other family. I'm saying that when Iris calls you family, everything in me says yes. He caught her hands, rough thumbs stroking across her knuckles. I'm saying that I'm falling in love with you, Mara Bentley, and it terrifies me as much as that storm did. The world seemed to narrow to this moment, his hands holding hers, the sun warm on their faces, the sound of Iris's laughter carrying from the house. Everything she'd been running from, everything she'd been afraid to want, stood before her in the form of this weathered man with eyes full of hope and fear. Ain't she what loved him too, had loved him since that night they'd stood in the hallway, bound by shared grief and a lullaby. I can't think when you're looking at me like that. Then don't think. His voice was rough. Just tell me if I'm alone in this. Tell me if I should let Reed arrange those interviews. Tell me if... You're not alone, The words came out whispered. "You haven't been alone since the night you almost didn't come home. Maybe before that, maybe since the first time Iris smiled and you looked at me like I'd given you the moon." His hands tightened on hers. "Mara, Papa Uncle Reed says to tell you he's ready to go." Iris's voice broke the spell, and they stepped apart, both breathing as if they'd run miles. "We're not finished," Calder said quietly. "This conversation, you and me, we're not finished." She nodded, not trusting her voice. He went inside, and she heard the rumble of male voices. Reed's sharp with disapproval, Calder's steady as granite. When Reed emerged, his face was set in lines of frustrated resignation. "Miss Bentley," he stopped before her, carpet bag in hand. "I owe you an apology. My brother has made it clear that you are essential to this household's happiness." "Thank you, Mr. Raines. I still think Denver would be better for all concerned." He glanced at the house. "But Calder's as stubborn as our father was. When he decides something, mountains are easier to move." "Is that a warning?" "An observation." His smile was rueful. "You've done wonders with Iris. I can't deny that. Just be careful with them. They've lost enough." "So have I." He studied her for a long moment. "Yes, I suppose you have. Perhaps that's why it works." He tipped his hat. "Until the next time, Miss Bentley." As the carriage pulled away, Mara felt arms wrap around her waist from behind. Iris, smelling of sunshine and lavender soap. "He's gone," the child announced with satisfaction. "Papa said he had urgent business in Denver. I think the urgent business was Papa's mad face. Did you see Papa's mad face? It was very mad." "I saw." "Good." Iris squeezed tighter. "I don't want you to go to Denver. Denver doesn't need you. We need you." Over the child's head, Mara saw Calder standing in the doorway, watching them with an expression that made her knees weak. He'd defended her to his brother, chosen her them over family pressure and societal expectations. The weight of that choice settled over her like a blanket. "Come on," she said to Iris, voice not quite steady. "Let's make something special for supper, to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" Mara looked again at Calder, saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes, terror and joy and possibility, all tangled together. "Spring," she said finally. "Let's celebrate spring." But as they went inside together, Iris chattering about cakes and preserves, Mara knew they were celebrating more than the season. They were celebrating choices made and boundaries crossed, celebrating the fragile, stubborn hope of hearts learning to trust again. Reed was right about one thing. There was nothing convenient about any of this. But as Calder's hand brushed hers in the doorway, as Iris tugged them both toward the kitchen, Mara thought perhaps the best things never were. The little wooden church sat weathered and patient at the edge of town, its steeple reaching toward a June sky so blue it hurt to look at. Inside, wildflowers filled mason jars on the windowsills Iris's touch, gathered that morning with dirt still under her fingernails and joy shining from her face. "Stop fussing! Mrs.!" Paolo commanded, batting Mara's hands away from the simple ivory dress. "You look beautiful, like a bride should." "I'm not a young bride," Mara protested, though her eyes in the small mirror were bright with anticipation. "I'm a practical widow marrying a practical widower." Mrs. Paolo's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Nothing practical about the way that man looks at you, like you hung the moon and taught it to sing." Through the thin walls, they could hear the small congregation gathering, not many, for Calder had kept the announcement quiet, inviting only those who'd stood by them through the whispers and speculation. Paolo was there, loyal as always, and, surprisingly, Judge Weatherby and his wife from Denver, who'd made the journey after hearing the news from Reed. He came around, then, Mara asked, "Reed?" "Sent his regrets and his blessing both, Mrs. Paolo adjusted Mara's collar one final time. And a silver tea service that likely cost more than my house. Guilt gift, if you ask me. A knock interrupted them. Miss Mara, Iris's voice, vibrating with excitement. Papa says it's time. He says if we wait any longer, he might lose his nerve and have to go stand in a snowstorm to find it again. Mara laughed, the sound releasing the last of her nervousness. She opened the door to find Iris transformed in her new blue dress, the one they'd sewn together through long spring evenings. Her dark hair was braided with ribbons and wildflowers, her face luminous with happiness. You look like a fairy princess, Mara said. And you look like Mama Mara the bride. Iris took her hand, then paused. Is it okay that I'm happy today, even though it means Papa's not married to my first mama anymore? Mara knelt carefully in her wedding dress. Do you remember what you told us about your mama in heaven, tending her garden? Where everything blooms at once. I think she's tending us too, from up there, watching us bloom in our own time. She smoothed a wayward curl from Iris's forehead. Being happy today doesn't take anything away from her. It adds to the love she planted. Iris considered this with the seriousness of a child wrestling with large truths. Like the rose garden stone, we didn't throw away the broken pieces. We made them into something new. Exactly like that. Good. Iris tugged her toward the door. Then let's go make something new. The church aisle seemed both endless and too short. Mara saw it all in glimpses, Paolo grinning beneath his best hat, Judge Weatherby nodding approval, Mrs. Henderson in the back row looking pinched but present. But mostly she saw Calder, standing at the altar in his dark suit, looking at her like a man witnessing sunrise after a long, long night. Reverend Morrison kept the ceremony simple. They'd both buried spouses. Both knew the weight of "till death do us part" when he asked for the rings. Calder produced too a simple gold band for Mara, and something that made her breath catch. This was Catherine's, he said quietly, showing her the delicate ring with its small sapphire. I want you to have it. She would want you to have it, for Iris someday, from both her mothers. Mara's eyes filled, but her voice was steady. I'll keep it safe. I promise. They spoke their vows in voices meant for each other, not the congregation. When Calder slipped the ring on her finger, his hands were steady as the mountains. When he kissed her brief, proper, but with a promise of forever in it, Iris cheered loud enough to scandalize Mrs. Henderson. Afterward, they stood outside the church accepting congratulations, the June sun warm on their faces. Mrs. Paolo had organized a small reception at the ranch. Nothing fancy, just cake and lemonade and the chance for neighbors to extend their good wishes or satisfy their curiosity. It's a good match, Judge Weatherby said, pumping Calder's hand. Your brother will come to see that. He already has. Calder replied. Sent a letter saying he'll visit at Christmas. Wants to see Iris in her first school play. School play? Mara looked at him in surprise. Did I forget to mention they're starting a proper school in town come fall? Asked if you might be willing to help with the teaching, given how well you've done with Iris. His smile was mischievous. I may have said yes on your behalf. Calder Rains, you did not... Papa's in trouble, Iris stage whispered to Mrs. Paolo, Mama Mara has her serious face on. I'll teach him a lesson later, Mara promised, trying to look stern and failing entirely. When we don't have an audience. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, Iris dozing between them on the wagon seat, exhausted by excitement. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, and Mara felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. Regrets? Calder asked softly. No, you... Only that it took me so long to see what was right in front of me. He shifted the reins to one hand, used the other to take hers. Thank you. For what? For being patient with my stubbornness, for loving Iris when I was too lost to do it properly, for coming back from that snowstorm, for saying yes today. He squeezed her hand. For all of it. They crested the hill that overlooked the ranch, and Mara saw what he'd done. Lanterns hung from every porch post and tree, creating pools of golden light. The garden where they'd placed Catherine's memorial stone was decorated with ribbons and more wildflowers. It should have felt like too much, like trying too hard, but instead it felt like hope made visible. "When did you—" "Paolo and the boys said it was their wedding gift." Calder's voice was rough with emotion. "Said a new beginning deserved proper lighting." They carried Iris inside, tucking her into bed still wearing her wedding finery. She roused enough to wrap her arms around both their necks. "Best day ever," she mumbled. "Love you, Papa. Love you, Mama Mara." "Love you too, little bird," they said in unison, then looked at each other over her head and laughed quietly at the synchronization. Later, in the kitchen that had seen so much of their story, they sat at the familiar table with cups of tea and slices of wedding cake. The house settled around them with comfortable sounds, boards creaking, wind sighing through the eaves, the tick of the mantel clock marking new time. "I keep thinking I'll wake up," Mara admitted. "Find myself back in Laramie. All of this a dream born from grief. If it's a dream, we're sharing it." Calder reached across the table to take her hand. "And I have no intention of waking up." She turned her hand in his, intertwining their fingers. His ring caught the lamplight, as did hers, two circles representing not just their union, but all the circles that had brought them here. The cycle of seasons, of loss and renewal. The circle of Iris's arms around their necks. The wedding rings that had come before, honoring the past while embracing the future. "I love you," she said, the words still feeling new and precious on her tongue. "I didn't think I'd ever say that again to anyone." "Nor I." He brought her hand to his lips. "But here we are." "Here we are," she agreed. "A baron who wanted no wife, and a widow who prayed for a child not her own." His eyes were soft in the lamplight. "Seems we both got more than we bargained for. The best things usually come that way." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch cattle lowing in the distance, an owl calling from the barn, the whisper of wind through the growing wheat. This land that had seemed so harsh and unforgiving when Mara first arrived now felt like home in the truest sense. "What are you thinking?" Calder asked. "About circles," she said, "about broken things made new, about how love doesn't always look like we expect it to." "No," he agreed. "Sometimes it looks like a silent child learning to sing. Sometimes like a woman walking into a snowstorm with nothing but rope and determination. Sometimes like a man finally understanding that honoring the past doesn't mean living in it. And sometimes," Mara added, "it looks like a kitchen table and wedding cake, and knowing tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but trusting we'll face them together." "Together," he echoed. "I like the sound of that." Outside, the moon rose full and bright, silvering the ranch with its blessing. Inside, two people who had thought their hearts too broken for new love discovered that sometimes the mended places are the strongest. They talked until late about plans for the school, for Iris, for the ranch, about everything and nothing, the way married people do when they're building a life from the foundation up. When they finally climbed the stairs, Mara paused at the window that overlooked Catherine's garden. The memorial stone caught the moonlight, and for a moment she could almost see her a woman tending flowers that bloomed all at once, smiling at the family who had learned that love multiplies rather than divides, that there's always room for more in a willing heart. "Thank you," Mara whispered to the night, to Catherine, to God, to whatever force had brought her through her own wilderness to this moment. Then Calder's hand found hers, warm and solid and real, and they walked together into their new beginning, not perfect, not without shadows, but theirs, a love story written not in grand gestures but in small kindnesses, in patience through storms, in the courage to reach for happiness when it seemed impossibly far away, and in a house that had once held only silence and sorrow. A A new chapter began filled with laughter and tears, and the ordinary miracles of a family bound not by tragedy, but by choice. Not by loss, but by love. Not by what was, but by what could be. The baron had found his baroness. The widow had found her home. And the little girl who had lost her voice had found it again. Stronger than ever. Ready to tell the world that sometimes the best families are the ones that choose each other. Over and over. Every single day. In the warm kitchen of the Rains Ranch, love had indeed proved itself stronger than winter, more enduring than grief, and infinitely more powerful than fear. And that, perhaps, was the greatest miracle of all. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope it touched your heart as much as it touched mine while telling it. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and let me know what part of the world you're in. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic stories of love, loss, and redemption from the American frontier. Share your thoughts about Mara and Calder's journey in the comments. Did their story remind you of the power of second chances? Until next time, partners.